Hey there, I'm Brittany Smith and you're watching Filmmaker Symposium. So today we're going to talk about plot form and the three different kinds that exist in filmmaking and storytelling. So the first one is Archplot, the second one is Minimalist Plot, and the third one is Antiplot. So stay tuned because we're going to break each one down throughout this episode. So our first plot form is the Archplot. Now the Archplot is based off of classical design principles. So this plot form is actually the most popular plot form that you'll see in Hollywood. So any movie that you see is most likely the Archplot. It's your very basic, or I shouldn't say basic, but it's your most solid and structural plot form that's used widely across history and across the world. So there are 7 ways in which we can identify an Archplot. Now, the first way is that conflict is defined by external conflict. So, for instance, in Hunger Games, Katniss and her conflict is more in regards to an oppressive government. So that is an external form of conflict. Now, there are some internal conflicts with Katniss. So she's dealing with the romance with Peeta, and she's dealing with that kind of internally. But the majority of the conflict is actually her against President Snow. The second way we can identify an Archplot is the fact that it's linear in its storytelling. Now, this might be just kind of obvious because how can you tell a story outside of a linear framework? Well, there are stories that are told outside of a linear framework, and they're kind of confusing, I guess you would say, but those would be under Antiplot. But an Archplot is going to tell a story in a linear fashion. Even if it has flashbacks, it's still going to be a linear story because the viewer is seeing the story in a matter of time and space in a linear sense. The third way we can identify is the fact that most Archplots have one protagonist. Now, this is not always true, but for the most part, we have one protagonist who's the main character that's fighting against a certain struggle or conflict. The fourth way we can identify is that an Archplot has a closed ending. Now, this is something that our family really appreciates because whenever there's not a closed ending, all of us go haywire. But a closed ending is when all questions are answered, there's nothing left unturned, the story is final, there's closure, and there's either victory or not victory. So an Archplot also adheres to the rules of the story world. So let's say you have a story set in the 1700s. It's a super serious drama and people are expecting a super serious drama. But you have a UFO come and drop aliens and everyone kills all the aliens kill everybody. Well, that's not exactly adhering to the rules of your story world because your story world is 1700s and there might be a place for aliens in the 1700s, but a super serious drama set in the 1700s would not really jive with that. The other thing is that the main protagonist is actually pursuing a goal that he or she wants and is fighting for that goal against enemies who are keeping him or her from actually getting that goal. And then last but not least, there's an obvious change by the end of the story, either in the character or in the character's situation. So for instance, in National Treasure, you start out with a man who's looking for treasure and doesn't have the treasure, and then by the end of the story, he has the treasure. So that is a very clear change that has been made, and that's what the story is surrounding. Now, the Archplot is your basic foundation for storytelling. So any screenwriters who are new to screenwriting should really master this Archplot form because it's going to be the basis for which you can branch off into other plot forms. So definitely master this one. It's going to be the most basic foundation you can start out with. So the next plot would be the Minimalist Plot. It utilizes minimalist principles. It's also called Mini-Plot, and this particular plot form is a little bit less secure feeling. It's more inconclusive, and it leaves the audience to answer questions for the movie instead of having the filmmaker answer all these questions for the audience. So there's several ways in which you can identify a minimalist plot. The first way is internal conflict. So instead of having an external battle with something out there in the world, it's actually going to be an internal battle. So a good example of this would probably be the movie Silence. So the movie Silence is all about a Catholic priest who goes into Japan and he's battling this thing internally about whether he should deny Christ or not. So this is an internal battle that's going on with him. The other thing is the ending. So if you feel like you've gotten to the end of a movie and you're left with so many questions, you're probably watching a minimalist movie or you're watching a really poorly done movie. But a minimalist movie is meant to leave you with lots of questions so that you will go home and think about it. So if you've ever watched a movie like that and you're frustrated, that's probably what's going on. Now, mini plots many times have multiple protagonists as well. So that's another way you can kind of identify. This is not always true, but many times they'll have multiple protagonists in the story. The other thing is that the protagonist is going to deal with conflict passively. So instead of actively trying to defeat a certain enemy or a certain ideology, they're going to be battling within themselves. So this is going to be more of a passive battle rather than an active external battle. The other thing is that the change within a minimalist story is going to be ever so subtle and ever so slight because it's internal. You can't necessarily verbalize everything that's going on internally, so it has to be demonstrated in a different sort of way. So when you're watching a minimalist movie, the change you're seeing in the emotions is hardly recognizable, but it is there. Now, minimalism, as much as it can be super frustrating for a moviegoer who wants solid answers, it can be a really powerful tool. I think especially as a Christian, it can really strike up some conversation in your audience and get them to think. So minimalism, while it's certainly a different plot form that we don't see as much, I definitely think there's some ways that we can use this platform more often in order to invoke thinking in our audience and more contemplation. Now the next platform is the Antiplot. And the Antiplot is basically exactly what it says, Antiplot. It's anti-structure, it just goes against all the rules of platform, and it's basically at war with the Archplot, or the classical design principles. So a movie that would kind of go with this is Monty Python. I actually have not seen that movie, but I've heard of it a lot, so I'm sure many of my viewers have seen it as well. But apparently Monty Python just goes against rhyme or reason. You know, it's just kind of like the Picasso of the art form of filmmaking. So Antiplot is meant to be just going against all the rules. So 3 different ways that you can identify an antiplot would be the fact that there's really no linear story going on. Many times an antiplot will not even use time. It's just kind of like jumping around and kind of, you just don't know how it works with time. So it's not linear, it's just kind of jumping around all over the place. Secondly, I think we've already talked about this, but it just doesn't follow story rules. It kind of just is not consistent with your story world rules. So we talked about the 1700s story where the aliens come in and defeat everybody. Well, that would be perfect for an antiplot. So things like that. An antiplot would include breaking of most rules. Also, an antiplot is affected by random coincidences. So there's just a lot of random events that happen and it doesn't really make sense with cause and effect. It's definitely against everything that a classical design structure would have you believe. So hopefully that gives you an overall idea of what types of platforms are out there. Once again, you want to start with that classical design principle and get the main platform down, the Archplot. And then after you've mastered that, then you can kind of start diving into some other platform ideas. Personally, I'm probably going to be sticking more with the classical design, but I do like the elements of minimalism. So I might, dive into that every once in a while because I think it's kind of interesting. But for now, I'm going to master the archetype.